Good afternoon, everybody. Hope you're having a wonderful day. My name is Etheline Ironcloud Two Dogs. Shina Ikikchumi takes the robe woman. I'm Oglala Lakota. And I am from Porcupine, South Dakota on the Pine Ridge Reservation. We are here to give you some information and provide a resource for 2019 Tribal Youth Program Grantees. And this resource is telling our story through evaluation. So we're going to spend the next 90 minutes talking about evaluation, and hopefully it will be a helpful resource for you all. I'm here with Marnina Evans. Marnina is a lead research associate at Westat with over 17 years of experience in research, evaluation, and technical assistance in child welfare, juvenile justice, and other human service areas. She currently serves as the Westat Project Director for the Capacity Building Center for Tribes, which provides capacity building services and resources to tribal child welfare programs. As the data and technology arm of the Center for Tribes, the Westat team offers technical assistance in data collection, data management, data analysis, planning for continuous quality improvement, and program evaluation, and other aspects of data. So I'm really happy that Marnie has agreed to help with this, and she is a great resource. So looking forward to sharing this time with her. At this time, I would like to also really acknowledge my appreciation for Mahasani, my other half, which is the term in Lakota language for my partner, my companion, Khmuya Money, Richard Two Dogs, and he will be doing the closing. So Laura, could you switch the slide to the closing? And Mahasani, if you could share with us a blessing for our gathering here, really appreciate it. Kimamai.
Okay, good afternoon, everybody. I'm honored to give the blessing at this time. So my name is Richard Two Dogs, as my wife said. My Lakota name, my spiritual name is Khmuya Money, means walks with a roaring. So I want everybody to close your eyes and visualize maybe a relative who is at this time maybe ill, or somebody that has passed on at this time or in the past, or some of you that are still in mourning. And pray along with me in your mind as I pray. And I'm going to pray in my language, Lakota language. Oheche oyate apta heche hinajin pina taku kuapi ki he. Mokan jalina pathoka wichaiza pina oicha kaktikjimka. Nisan sampra oichakina. Moka oicha oncha oyate ki wichokuja onka kija pina yota wakan. No ohun keshni wakan ya hechi mkana unshi wichakilana. Wongla wichaku kta hechi hoichichi. When I said to Gasla out on a little washy happy hitchy and which I lost in a Tiwai opal. Hetche gatis gaoyon behena kitcha to Gasla oichaking to hetche hoichichi. Oichichi to Gasla on petokile. Unkam capo to Gasla hetche trocata kionaki. Waniche uncle opto yak, the wanito techikavan. Or hetche pejo tronji on galion echani. Uchoku kile kaski ink to hetche. Hoiwa to Gasla hetche. Thank you.
Wopila, thank you very much for that blessing. And we really need those prayers at this time. All of us, I think, across Indian country and everywhere else going through difficult times. And I wanted to acknowledge that. I would like to ask Laura to give us some information on technical support, and I'll turn it over to her.
Thank you so much. My name is Laura. I serve as a program assistant with the Tribal Youth Resource Center, and I'll walk us through just a few quick tech notes for our time together today. The first is a request that if everyone who's here in this room together could please put yourself on mute if you're not speaking. Everyone is able to mute and unmute themselves. So if you could please check that your line is muted now, just to cut down on any background noise, we would appreciate it. The next thing is just questions are encouraged and welcomed at any point throughout the session today. So please, at any point, use the chat box to submit questions, share any thoughts, and participate in group discussion. Also, at the end of our time together, there will be the opportunity to participate in a survey about today's session, and we would be grateful if you could please take a moment to fill it out. It doesn't take long, and it's really helpful to us. So a link will go in the chat, and then we'll also send that link out after in an email. And finally, a note that a lot of resources will be discussed today, and the resources will all be shared in an email following today's session. So just to share in advance that will be going out to everyone, as well as the PowerPoint. Well, thank you, and I'll hand it over to today's facilitators.
Thank you, Toja, Laura. I appreciate that, and I apologize for not introducing you. I'd like to introduce Chungshi Tasha Friday. She's the Assistant Director of the Tribal Youth Resource Center. But before I do that, I'm just going to briefly review the objectives. We'd like you to, first of all, understand what evaluation is. I would say that all of you know what evaluation is and how it applies to tribal youth programs, and also learning the basic elements of evaluation planning and applying the basic elements by walking through an evaluation planning process for an example youth program. So those are the things that we'd like to accomplish today, and we're real happy to be here with you. We know that it's a little ambitious, so but this is recorded, so you can go back and review, and also the resources that will be shared with you. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to Chungshi. Tasha. You're muted, Chungshi.
Just really talking. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm happy to join each and every one of you here. And I know some of us have joined together recently. So it's good to see you again virtually. But as a reminder of just who we are and who we are as a center in the spirit of the Tribal Youth Resource Center, we do try to do all the work that we set out with the value that our children are sacred, and that's something that we share across tribes and communities. And so that's really where we try to work from, is from our hearts and our spirits with that intention. We are a training and technical assistance center that is funded by the Office of Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention, but we really approach the work with an in-depth and sincere, authentic understanding and appreciation for American Indian and Alaskan Native history, customs, and our traditional justice systems. So that's the paradigm from which we work. Next slide. We do try to provide culturally based and trauma-informed training and supporting you all any way that we can with the training and technical assistance as grantees funded under tribal youth programs and juvenile healing to wellness courts. We are able to serve all interested federally recognized tribes, regardless of if they've received funding in these areas or not. So it is open, and if you have a training and technical assistance request, if you're a grantee, definitely reach out to your TTA provider. But if you are a federally recognized tribe, our contact information is here, and there's a training and technical assistance form on our website, tribalyouth.org. Next slide. So the Tribal Youth Resource Center is administered by the Tribal Law and Policy Institute, which is a Native-owned and operated nonprofit. At TLPI, we are dedicated to providing free publication resources, comprehensive training, and technical assistance for Native nations and tribal justice systems. Another part of the work that we do is in partnership with the National Native Children's Trauma Center. There, we are able to offer numerous resources to help communities be trauma informed in their work and their application within these areas. And so we're able to provide support materials to serve tribal youth and healing to wellness courts in that perspective as well. So the website for TLPI is listed here, and we do have a full listing of the National Native Children's Trauma Center offerings on our website as well. So thank you again for joining, and I know this is going to be a great session.
Thank you, Tungshi. Appreciate that. I'm going to be turning it over to Marnie now for discussing what is evaluation.
Great, thank you, Ethelene. And hello, everyone. It's such a pleasure to be here and to be learning about all the wonderful work that you're doing with your young relatives in your communities. So thank you for having me. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what evaluation is. What do we mean when we talk about evaluating programs? So evaluation really is asking some high-level questions about our programs. Are we doing things the way that we plan to do them? Are we doing them well? Are there ways that we could do them better? And ultimately, after we've done all these things, are we seeing the changes that we want to see? Are we seeing the benefits to our youth, to our families, our communities? And how can we keep getting better and better at what we do as we go? And we find these things out by looking at data and information. And we'll talk a little more about what we mean by data and information and how we get that kind of data and information. But one thing I want to emphasize is that it's not a judgment. Sometimes evaluation can sound very judgy. I know probably many of you have gone through like your personnel evaluations. I just went through one this past month. You know, it's always very tense, even though you know you did a good job. So this isn't about good or bad. We like to say it's not about pointing fingers at anybody. It's about pointing the way to doing things better and having a better effect of the interventions that we want to benefit our communities. And Etheline's going to talk in a little bit about building a culture of evaluation. I think that's really where it starts, is you know, understanding that it's for the benefit of what we're doing. Next slide, please, Laura. So what specifically can evaluation help us do? Ultimately, evaluation is about understanding what's going on with our program, being able to communicate that to others who need to know what's going on, and also about making decisions. So one thing is just understand what's going well and what can be improved. You know, very basic monitoring. Are we going in the right direction? Who's steering this car, and do we need to stop for gas at some point? You can make decisions about how the program's going, whether you want to make any changes in it, and whether the resources that you're allocating are going in the right places. Because we all have limited funds, and you don't want to, you know, keep paying for something that's not working. But if you can show that something's really working, you might be able to get more funds for it. Another important thing is just understanding the perspectives of our relatives, the people that we're doing this for and with. That includes the youth, their families, your program staff, your community partners, everybody who's involved in this undertaking that you're doing. And this also empowers and honors the sovereignty of your tribal nation, because this is about telling your story, and you really shouldn't let anybody else tell your story if you can tell it yourself, because that is the most honest and true way to help people understand what's going on, is to be able to tell it in your own words and with your own information. And of course, ultimately, this can sustain your successful programs and results, because it can keep your practice on track even beyond the period of this grant, so that you know you're still doing things the way that you had intended. And also it can justify more funding, so you can reach out to other funders and people who can provide you with the resources you need to keep going. Next slide, please, Laura. Okay, so when we talk about evaluation, or I'm sure you've all heard a lot about evaluation over the years, and you probably hear a lot of terms thrown around about evaluation, like formative evaluation or summative evaluation. People could talk about usability testing or randomized control trials. and it could get really confusing. So we're just going to break it down for the purposes of this presentation to two basic types of evaluation. So one is the process or implementation evaluation and monitoring. So that's the part where we look at how is the program operating, what's the context, the community context, our agency context around that operation, and how does that impact it? Are we doing things the way that we had originally planned? Did we have to make some changes to that original design? If so, why were those necessary, and how are they working? And then how can we keep improving the implementation? And that goes to the monitoring and what we call continuous and quality improvement, or CQI. And that is an ongoing process that you can do really for as long as the program exists, just to, you know, keep improving and keep telling that story. And then we'll also talk a little bit about outcome evaluation. And that is looking at whether you achieve those goals. Did you achieve the objectives and goals that you set out to achieve? And what can you say about all the outcomes for the youth? You know, are they doing better? Looking at those short-term outcomes, maybe some medium-term, long-term, 6 months to a year in the future, and are those outcomes ultimately being sustained? Now, these terms are all very Western. I apologize for that, but we know that evaluation is also very Indigenous with a long history. And now I'm going to turn it over to Ethelene to talk some more about that.
Thank you, Marnie. Appreciate your information there. Very helpful. One of the things that we really wanted to discuss was the Indigenous evaluation perspective and Indigenous ways of knowing. So all of you know that Indigenous societies, tribal societies, we've always had evaluation. In fact, there's a word in Lakota that is for evaluation is wopasi. When you see something, then you investigate it, you look into it. And so we've always had that. We've had a term for evaluation. We've had a process for evaluation. We really reflect on, you know, the natural and the spirit worlds, you know, the information from there to make decisions. We use our cultural values to measure success. For example, Wakayaja in the Lakota language means as a sacred being, but it's translated to child. So if we were to measure how we treat children according to that term, Wakayaja, then, you know, we would be, our practice or our behavior or attitude toward children would be treating them as a sacred being. So we use our cultural values to measure, you know, like not only success, but, you know, how we're doing things. So a lot of times, you know, whenever Western science discovers, quote unquote, discovers something, they reach the same conclusion that Indigenous people have always known. One example is there's, you know, studies on water, that water has a spirit, and Dr. Masuro Emoto did research for years and years and years about, you know, water, and he concluded that water has a spirit. Indigenous people, tribal people have always known that water is life and water does have a spirit. There's also the consideration of sovereignty in terms of our data, and if we were to really look at data as in a sovereign sense, then that would equal tribal sovereignty. So for example, you know, if we have data about our ceremonies, for example, and, you know, their effectiveness or the process, that belongs to tribes. So we have to look at, you know, data as being categorized as what can we share and what shouldn't we share, you know. So those are the, I think, one of the considerations that we wanted to bring to you. The next slide, Toja. So what is Indigenous evaluation? So it's not just a matter of adapting like Western evaluation to American Indian context. It's a total reconceptualization, as Joan LaFrance says. She says that, you know, it requires, you know, rethinking, you know, a shift in a worldview. So whenever you think about Indigenous evaluation, like Marnie said earlier, don't think about judgment. Think about, the process and how we want to strengthen, what we're doing, and how we want to measure, but in a culturally appropriate way. Next slide, Toja. So an example of Indigenous evaluation is, look at this little boy, this little Takoja. In our Lakota language is, Takoja is grandchild. And I actually took this picture. So he went out this summer to pick sage. He knew that we needed sage for our ceremonies, for throughout the year, that it only grows a certain time and there's a certain time to harvest it. So these ancestral teachings that were handed down to him included evaluating the time of year to harvest sage. So think about your timing in terms of evaluation. When do you do that? And that's something that each program has to make a decision about. Understanding the process of making offerings before picking it. So it's not just about, like going out and picking it. It's about putting down tobacco and apologizing to the family of sage for taking, the sage and giving thanks to the spirit of the sage. He also needed to know where it grows. Where's the best place that it grows? So we have all of these ways of evaluating in terms of, can you go back to that, please? That previous slide. So we really have to understand the goals, the aspirations of Indian communities, of Indigenous people to preserve, restore, and protect our culture and our ways of doing things. So those of you that are implementing cultural practices, cultural lifeways in your program, then this is something that we would need to consider about the Indigenous evaluation. Okay, the next slide. So where do we start? From the beginning, we determine where and when the sage grows, making offerings, understanding the process of, evaluation, the data collection, where and how to pick the sage, and how to be culturally sensitive to the, overall, to the youth, to the family in the evaluation process, being non-invasive, non-intrusive, honoring confidentiality, honoring privacy, and knowing when to harvest, in this example, before it seeds. So we need to analyze, our data. We need to analyze, that we can only pick the sage at a certain time. So next slide, please. Okay, so I'll turn it over to Marnie and Toja.
Thank you, Etheline. Everything you shared was so wonderful. I'm always just love hearing about Indigenous science and ways of knowing. It's really profound. So we wanted to make this presentation a little more interactive and encourage folks to give us some feedback. So we're going to do a quick poll here with Laura's help and just ask you about your experiences with evaluation. Asking, have you ever participated in a program evaluation before, either as a participant or leading an evaluation? Really any interaction with it, or whether you just never encountered evaluation in a program before. And you can also feel free to elaborate in the chat, or as always, ask us any questions. Okay, great. So some folks have participated, wonderful, and a lot haven't. So that is great. We have a good mix of experience and some folks who are doing this for the first time. That's going to be wonderful for our ongoing discussion here.
Thank you for that, Marnie and Toja Laura. So we wanted to bring to you an evaluation overview. So if you look at evaluation as telling your story, our story starts thousands of years ago. We don't even have a time frame. If we were to evaluate what we have preserved over time, what we have sustained over time. Many Indigenous people have sustained their language, their culture, their ceremonies, so if we were to tell our story, we did come through some very, very devastating times as Indigenous people, but we're still here. We're still telling our story. So that's very promising. If you were to look at this, consider this graphic, look at the purple circle, preparation and readiness. That's really, really important in terms of evaluation. We have for you an evaluation readiness checklist that you'll get in the resources document by email that Toja Laura mentioned, and other documents or other resources that will help you with readiness. Creating a culture of evaluation is real important. So if we were to sit down as a program, as a group, and say, what does evaluation mean to you? And you'll get varied responses. Some will say, oh, that's so boring. Some will say, well, that's about judgment, and I get fearful, I get anxious when I think about evaluation. And, some might say, well, it's about, having a process to make decisions, to strengthen our program, to strengthen our services. So you'll get varied responses, but we really encourage having that kind of conversation at your before you start an evaluation process, because what you're doing is you're creating that culture of evaluation. So if you're all on the same page about what evaluation means, then you're more likely to have more engagement, not only within the staff, but also if you had this conversation with the youth and with the families also. So that preparation and readiness is real important. The green circle refers to, building or developing a logic model. And that's really important because the logic model gives us a picture of, the entire project. So we start from what is the issue? What is the need? And then we go to, all the way through the process and, well, what do we hope to see as an outcome? And we can choose from the logic model what we'd like to evaluate. We're not going to evaluate everything in our program, but we can choose. Now look at the yellow circle, outcomes and performance measures. Those are the things that we identify within the logic model that we want to evaluate. And then the blue circle, we do the data collection. And that data collection and analysis will tell our story. We'll be able to look at it and we'll be able to see where we're at, where we're going. It can lead to sustainability. So I think the respect for the culture, the tribal sovereignty has to be integrated throughout the process. And also look at these circles as being interconnected, that they all connect with one another in terms of, one leads to another. But there's some areas that overlap, and that's okay. It's not step 1, step 2, step 3. You might have to go back, but this is just an overview of the evaluation process. Next slide, please. I'll turn it over to Marnie.
Thank you, Ethelene. So I think we're going to just kind of reiterate and go into a little more detail on what Ethelene has presented as an overview with that beautiful graphic. I've been talking about some of the considerations when you're planning for your evaluation. What are some of the things that we should all be thinking about? One thing is to plan early, as soon as you can. I know you're in the first year of your grant still, so you're still in very good time for developing a good plan. And going back to a lot of the the beautiful story of the boy with the sage that Athleen shared with us. You want your plan to be able to identify each of those aspects of evaluation and timing, and making sure that all of those things are what's right for your program and your community specifically. As Athleen said, we're going to provide you with a nice little checklist for evaluation readiness, going through each of the aspects that we're talking about now. And it's not to say that you need to check off everything in a certain order or in a certain time frame, but it's just considerations for it. So this is a quote that we really liked. Evaluation is an ongoing cycle. The best evaluations involve teamwork that include both the youth and adults, as well as input from program providers, funding participants, and technical experts in evaluation. And we're going to talk a little more about who to bring to the table, but really want to start thinking early about who needs to be there. What are the inputs that you need from each of the participants, and how are you going to work together? And finally, what resources are available for evaluation in your program? You know, resources are tight everywhere, always for social service programs, unfortunately. So evaluation could really be a good investment for your program in terms of the information that you get back and how it can guide your work and how it can help you share your story. But you need to be very conscientious about what resources you have. And that's not just funding, that's also your staff time, that can be technology, and that can be the time and the burden that you're asking of your youth and families and other community partners in terms of what kind of data collection you're trying to do. And people can get surveyed out pretty easily. So you want to be really thoughtful about those kind of resources as well. Next slide, please. Okay, so one of the fundamental questions is who's going to do this evaluation? You know, you kind of have to have somebody who's in charge of it. And there's kind of two big buckets that we can look at here. One is hiring an external evaluator. That could be a consultant from a tribal college, a local university, maybe somebody else at another part of your tribe who's done evaluation before and knows how to do it. It could be a private consultant or a firm. Anybody with that kind of expertise. Now, there's some pros and cons to this approach. The pro is that you get somebody with some expertise in evaluation methods, also someone else to do the work, which saves on your staff time, and someone who's coming from outside the program and might have more objectivity and isn't quite so close to what's going on. Now, some cons, obviously, is money that you're gonna have to pay that person. It could be potentially expensive depending on who you can find. And the objectivity has a flip side, which is that this person will be or could be outside of your community and thus not really familiar with your culture and your program and some of those things that you're going to have to teach that person and hope that they're able to learn in order to do this work well. So the alternative to hiring an outside evaluator is conducting it internally with your own staff. And for that, you would need somebody who is kind of enthusiastic about data or research, or as I like to kind of joke, but it's not really a joke, is not afraid of Excel. You know, somebody who is willing to tackle all that data collection. So some of the pros of this are that they're less expensive. There's somebody who's already working with the program. They could be a community member who is familiar with the values and the culture of your program and what you're doing. And some cons is that there could be a little bit of a learning curve if they don't have experience with evaluation. And there's also, of course, the cost of time taken from other responsibilities. You know, a lot of the times we're all overworked and overstressed already. So that's where this enthusiasm helps quite a bit. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, now I'm going to turn it back to Athleen to talk a little more about preparing for the evaluation.
So if you notice, thank you so much, Marty. If you notice, we really focus on preparation and readiness just so that we can really make sure that we understand, you know, what we're getting into and, you know, why it's important to prepare. So creating that culture of evaluation is real important. Convening an evaluation working group and include the stakeholders, the relatives, I would say, you know, the youth, the families, you know, have a working group that focuses on evaluation. Review the goals and objectives of your program and develop a logic model. Develop an evaluation action plan and connect with your technical assistance providers. We are here to assist, and if we cannot assist, we can find somebody to help you. So this is all about preparing. So next slide, Toja. So again, creating that culture of evaluation is real important. So establishing evaluation as an integral part of the program from beginning to end, and that you integrate the evaluation activities into the day-to-day processes. So collecting data regularly through program activities such as events, meetings, review the data regularly, like at staff meetings, to guide discussion and decision-making, and create a shared understanding of the value of evaluation. Develop evaluation practices that support the values and goals of the program and community. So that culture of evaluation, not necessarily the ethnic culture, but in terms of evaluation culture. So I'll turn it over to Marnie to talk about bringing our relatives to the table.
Exactly. Yes, as we're talking about, it's very important to bring everybody to the table together, everybody who needs to have a voice. So when you create your evaluation working group, you want to make sure that you have a team of people who have a role within this evaluation. So that's everybody you're working with, having some youth voice, having community partners, your elders, your program leaders, whoever, education from your tribal court, whoever might be involved in this, should have a seat at the table and be able to speak with you about, give their views, and make sure that they are informed and on board with it, because you need to be working from a common vision for the evaluation and the program. And this really helps everybody stay together, keep on track, and make sure that things are getting done the way that you want them to be done. And then when you make decisions, you have people there at the table so that everybody agrees, is on the same page about what you're doing and why. And if they're not in the evaluation working group, you also want to be able to engage your stakeholders. And so we have a little bit of a template here to talk about who you need to engage, what their interests and perspectives are, and then when and how you're going to engage them. And that's just a way to organize your thoughts around what do you need to know from folks, what do you need from them, what do they need from you, and to have an organized way of going about getting their input, because it's really easy for time just to slip by, and then suddenly you realize, wait, you haven't talked to this person in a while and they have no idea what you're doing, and that can cause problems later on. Okay, next slide. Okay, so one of the first stages of getting ready for an evaluation is looking at your goals and objectives. And that could be in your application for this grant, in your strategic plan. You should have some goals and objectives. And we like to talk about making sure that they are SMART. So SMART goals and objectives are specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, or relevant, I sometimes see as the R, and have a time frame. And this really helps lead into evaluation, because it makes sure that things are measurable and make sure that you can actually achieve them. You don't want to set a goal that really isn't realistic to be able to achieve within the time frame that you're doing it. You want to make sure it's relevant, that it's actually getting you to where you want to go. And then you need to understand what the time frame is. So making sure that the time frame is realistic, making sure it meets the requirements of your grant. And it also helps keep everybody accountable. So everybody knows, okay, this is when we are trying to achieve these particular goals. Okay. Next slide, please. Okay, so after we have our goals and objectives, we can look at a logic model. And I really love logic models because I am a very visual person. So I like seeing things in a visual way. And that's what a logic model presents. It's kind of a visual story of your program. Where are we going? How are we going to get there? So it lays out a lot of the goals and the outcomes. It tells you what things are going to look like when you succeed in your goals. And specifically, what are we actually doing to create these changes? And making sure that there is a connection between the activities that we're doing and the outcomes we want to see. Because a lot of the times, people will come up with great activities, but they're not necessarily going to lead directly to those outcomes, or there's a disconnect there where there's some other factor that could interfere and that you haven't thought of yet. So they're a really useful tool just to be able to visualize this and reflect those goals and objectives. Next slide, please. Okay, so here are the really basic elements of a logic model. And you can add in other things, but these are kind of the core elements you have to have. One are the inputs. So we've already talked about kind of the resources that you need to have. It could be money, it could be sources of data, it could be support from other programs or from your tribal council. And then that leads into activities. So what do we actually want to do in this program? What are the things that we have listed as our activities? Excuse me. And you want to make sure that there is a direct line between inputs and activities so that you know that you have the resources to be able to actually go through with these activities that you want to do. And then we move to outputs. So outputs are the results of these activities. So you could count the number of meetings you have with youth. You could count whatever it is that you're doing. You can count how many times has it happened and what came from that. And these are not outcomes. So a lot of the times I think folks get confused between outputs and outcomes and being able to say that a program was successful or not based on the outputs. So outputs are kind of that process evaluation that we talked about earlier, the implementation, so that you can look at, are we actually accomplishing what we wanted? Are we doing these activities? Are they resulting in the things that we thought? Are they happening and are they happening well? But then we have to move a little bit further and push to outcomes. So these are the short and long-term changes that you want to see result from your activities. So they could be changes in skills, knowledge, behavior, a lot of those things that you're looking at in your programs. And so that's directly with the youth. And are you seeing the changes in the youth that you want to see and figuring out how are you going to know that that is happening? And next slide, please. Okay, and I think Kathleen now will take us through some examples of logic models and the various ways that they can look.
Thank you so much, Marnie. I think, if we were to think about telling our story, and where we've been, like, so if you look at this graphic, the top, the kind of purple lavender shade, inputs, values, and context. So we're just presenting this in a different way than what Marnie previously discussed. It was kind of like a linear model, but right now we're looking at looking at it in a circular fashion. So where have we been? We just didn't start the program, somewhere like right when the funding started. We've been places. So we might have been in a place of strength and resiliency, but we've also might have been in a place of trauma, of things happening in our community that have impacted the reason for the program. And then go to the right where it's the light blue outputs, short-term outcomes. Where are we going? How do we want to visualize where we're going? Like we have our mission statement, our vision statement, and then down to the green triangle, activities and contributors to change. How will we get there? And then we look at long-term outcomes. When we get there, how do we know when we get there? And this is our story, our journey. And it doesn't end just with the program. A lot of things we carry on, with a different funding stream. So let's go to the next slide. So this is an example of a logic model, to increase cultural pride and identity. So what are the changes we want to see? And look to the far right, what is our hope for the future? So Down below in this table, healing is our future. What are the cultural values and principles that will guide our work? And what is the foundation for our work, our vision, our mission? So this is another example of how you can portray your information in a logic model. Okay, next slide, please. Now, this one is from the American Indian Higher Education Consortium, and they did their logic model in a really beautiful graphic. So they started with their activities, what they thought their short-term outcomes, kind of like climbing a mountain, and what are their long-term outcomes, so they have all of the activities underneath those short-term and long-term outcomes. And what they're hoping to achieve is summer employment students graduate and seek higher education. So they portrayed this in a way that was, to me, was very creative. Okay, next slide. And we will go to Marnie.
Thank you, Ethelene. So I'll present this one because this is from an organization that I work with. This is for the Capacity Building Center for Tribes, and it's something we use with child welfare programs when they are planning a change project. So this is a circular model that revolves around the vision for the program. So we try to get everybody together, everybody at the table, and ask, what is your vision for your community and your children and families? What will that look like in 5 years and 10 years? And with that in mind, we start off with what we know over here in the upper right-hand corner, which is the context around the program, the community, what's going on, what we know about the issues that we want to try to make change in. Then we look at who we impact, who is involved in this change, who is it benefiting, and who is making it happen. So be children, families, the community, could be the program staff, anybody who's involved with that. Then what we bring is the resources, like we talked about earlier, our inputs. So that could be anything from grant funding to the passion and commitment of the staff, to involvement with other programs. It's all the different resources, both physical, tangible, and intangible, that you could bring to this effort that is going to make the change. Then we look at what we change. These are our high-level goals and objectives. What are the changes that we're looking to specifically create? And we try to make them as specific and tangible as we can. And then what we do is the activities that we're doing to create the change. And ultimately, how we know, that is where we look at data and evaluation. So how are we going to know we're seeing that change? And that circles right back around to what we know. And then the cycle starts again as we look at other things that we want to work on or improve. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so here's another chance for you all to share a little bit with us. Does your program currently have a logic model? So whether it's a fully developed logic model, whether you started on it but still need some work, or whether you don't yet have one. And again, I encourage you all to also share in chat with us if you have any comments or questions. Okay, great. Thank you, Laura. Well, okay, so some of you do have a fully developed logic model. That is awesome. And exactly half of you have one, but are still working on it. That's wonderful too. And then about a third don't have one yet, but we're hoping that you'll be inspired to create one after this. That's great. Okay. Thank you, Laura. We can move to the next slide, and Ethelene, back to you.
Thank you, Marnie. So whenever we think about outcomes and performance measures, what questions do we want to answer? So what is the most important thing to be evaluated? Who are the key audiences who will have questions about your focus areas? And what questions will your key audience have about your program? How will you use the information for responses to any given questions? What will that information be used for? So we want to make sure our questions are crafted so that we are clear about what we're going to use the responses for. Okay, the next slide, please. So an evaluation action plan is a living roadmap for your evaluation journey. It's not something that's set in stone. So you might look at a focus area, and then 6 months from now, you might think, well, maybe we need to change our focus because this is what our data looks like. What is the questions? What are the signs of progress, the indicators, and what are the potential data sources? And what is the timing for your data collection and for your evaluation, reaching your indicators? Next slide, please. So the information that we need to answer our questions will lie in maybe surveys, spreadsheets. Maybe we're going to have questionnaires, quantitative data, qualitative data, maybe interviews, talking circles, focus groups, those kinds of, the kind of information that you want to collect might take a quantitative form or a qualitative form. So next slide, please. And I'll turn it over to Marnie.
Okay, so how do we collect this data and information? So in the previous slide, we saw the evaluation action plan where you can plan what data and information you need, and then you need to plan how you're actually going to get it. So we outlined a little tool here to say, what data are you going to collect? Where is that data? Who has it, either in their head or their data system? And how are you going to get it? Who is responsible for collecting that data? It's always important to really have a point person who is responsible for making sure that you get that data and that everything goes to plan. A target date for the data collection. Now this is important because you don't want to gather things like this age too early or too late. And for the purposes of these programs, one idea might be to align your data collection schedule with your OJJDP reporting periods. And that way you're only doing it once and making sure you get everything you need. And then finally, how are you going to store the data and who's going to have access to it? This is important because you want to keep it organized, and then you also want to make sure that some data is kept private because it could be personally identifiable, it could be sensitive data, and you want to make sure that the people who need it can get to it, but that it's not just sitting around making, tempting other people to look at it who maybe shouldn't be looking at it. Next slide, please. Okay, so when we talked about who has the data that you need, one factor may be that if another organization has it, either within your tribe or an outside organization, you may need to have some kind of MOU, which is a memorandum of understanding, or a partnership agreement or a data sharing agreement, or something along those lines in order to formalize the exchange of that data. And this is really for purposes of confidentiality and possibly legality, because every organization has their own policies on what information they can share and with whom. So by doing a formal MOU or data sharing agreement, you can outline what information you need that they can give you, who's going to be looking at it, and for what purpose. And that way there's an understanding of how that all is going to work. And sometimes different people will need to sign off on it, and that can really vary strongly between different kinds of organizations. So of course, you need to acknowledge the applicability of and adherence to both federal and tribal laws. So making sure that everybody's privacy and security is protected, especially the youth, of course. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so once you have the data, what are you going to do with it? One thing you can do with it is be monitoring your signs of progress. And the graphic here kind of represents my personal thoughts on it, which is, monitoring is where plans, the best laid plans, collide with reality. And we all know that feeling when things aren't either working great or they're not working at all. And being able to regularly look at data information helps keep us going in the right direction. So you can look at your progress, your timelines. Are we implementing as fast as we thought we were? If not, What's slowing us down? What kind of progress are we making toward our outcomes, our outputs, our performance measures? If we're not doing quite as well as we hoped, what course corrections can we make to get us back on path? And if we are doing as great as we hoped, then let's celebrate that, because that can put some more fuel in the tank for everybody if we celebrate the successes and say, hey, this is really going great. Look at what we're accomplishing. And of course, we like to say turnover proof the program for sustainability. So we all know that sometimes, unfortunately, you lose staff along the way over the course of a program. And if you have some data and information to show people coming in, to show the accomplishments and what you're doing, that can make it a lot easier to not lose any ground during those times of transition. And next slide. Okay. So telling our story from the present to the future. So this is the outcomes piece. So how are we going to tell the story of what we accomplished, what our youth accomplished in this program? So to do that, we have to start off with what we call baseline data. So that's how things exist right now. What do things look like now? So that we can see the change, because you have to know where you're starting from. Then you can look at interim or short-term outcomes. So what's going on, 6 months from now to a year from now, when you have started the program, but you're not quite done yet. And then you can look at those final outcomes. So at the end of the grant period, and then following up even past that, a year, 6 months after the program ends, or a year after, and seeing how those outcomes have changed, how the youth have changed, whether they're sustaining and even still improving those outcomes. And that allows you to tell the full story of where you started, how you got to where you were going, and what happens when you got there. Okay, next slide, please.
Thank you, Marnie. So we wanted to know from you, who do you think needs to hear the story of your program? So can you chat in your comments? Just think about, if you wanted to tell the story of your program, then who would you direct your information at? And some of you might think about maybe the youth, maybe families. What do you think? Who do you think needs to hear the story of your program? And that will determine what, how you craft your information. If you were to maybe present your story to a group of evaluators, you might use data, you might use tables. If you were to present your information to tribal council, it might look different. So who would you tell the story? So Jonathan is saying community members, tribal members not living on the reservation, tribal council, incoming tribal leaders like the governor. Thank you, Jonathan. Elika says community, school, staff, youth and their families, all important relatives, right, to tell our story to, because they are the ones that will be impacted. Thank you, those of you that responded. Okay, the next slide, please. So let's walk through this process with, an example program. So the vision statement, you craft a vision statement. What does that look like? Are you going to, in this example, strengthening youth, families, and communities? The mission. So the mission in this example is to revitalize, connect tribal youth to their culture. And the goal is to increase the cultural skills of 30 tribal youth to support their feelings of cultural identity and pride. Okay, next slide, please. So using this model, again, preparation and readiness, crafting the logic model, identifying the performance measures, doing the data collection and analysis, and then finally telling the story. Okay, next slide, please. So in this logic model, strengthening youth and families, the inputs would be resiliency. Our youth, our families, our communities are resilient. We've been through a lot. Some of us have a strong cultural identity and a way of life, intact tribal values, laws and principles. And I'm not really talking about laws in terms of, tribal code laws or state laws, but our own laws. So for example, Lakota people have their 7 sacred laws. They're called Wo'opre. And these laws are were given to us as a gift by the Creator, by our ancestors to help guide our lives. So those kind of laws and principles. And the activities can include cultural skill building, coming of age ceremonies, healing ceremonies, naming ceremonies, education on gender roles. The outputs would be youth receive a tribal name, they participate in a coming of age ceremony, they participate in healing ceremonies, they're educated on gender roles, they understand and know how to use ceremonial elements in prayer. And finally, the outcomes are that their cultural skills have increased. They have a greater sense of cultural identity and pride, and their well-being is enhanced by an increased sense of cultural identity. So that's an example of logic model of strengthening our youth, families, and communities. Okay, next slide, please. So this is another example. So the story is what are the changes we want to see? First of all, we start with that. Historically, our tribe had a strong cultural foundation. We have a story of resilience. Despite everything we've been to, we still are connected to our culture. What can we do today to support our relatives? Cultural skill building, cultural pride. What will be the outputs for each specific activity? So there's healing in our culture. That's the theme. So, for example, we might administer surveys, we might administer, questionnaires, engage youth in ceremonies, doing interviews. Our performance measure, is cultural skill building, cultural pride, so we would collect information on that. So what would we do to measure the outcomes and outputs of the program? So the theme is honoring our youth today. So 30 youth received their spirit name, for example. 30 youth participate in a coming of age ceremony or healing ceremony. Youth are understand and are able to use ceremonial elements for prayer and honoring our youth for tomorrow. What is our hope for the future? We want to see an increase in cultural skill building and cultural pride. We would like to see growth in the cultural identity as a result of participating in ceremonies, but this is evidenced by, for example, pre and post cultural identity surveys. So we can look at this, this model here as, something that overall will give a picture of how we are going to increase cultural pride and identity. Okay, next slide. And in this example, then we start, with resiliency at the top there, and then it's just being put in a different format, offering opportunities to 30 tribal youth to explore and strengthen cultural identity is where we're going. And how we get there is through the ceremonies, through honoring culture, talking circles, cultural skill building. When we get there, how we know we will get there is the youth will respond in the surveys, questionnaires with increased strong cultural identity and increased enhancement of well-being. So this is these were all examples of how you can put that enhancing Native tribal youth wellness and cultural identity in different formats for logic models. Okay, the next, please. Okay, so the sample evaluation action plan is, the focus area is cultural skill building. The evaluation question is, to what extent have youth participated in cultural teachings and ceremonies? So the signs of progress, the indicators are the number of youth who receive a spirit name, a tribal name, the number of youth who participated in the ceremonies. What are the data sources? The program data you put these in place, prior to doing the activities. And what is the timing? So monthly, collecting the data, analyzing it, and reviewing it with the Community Advisory Committee. Another area is cultural identity. To what extent has the program contributed to youth identifying and establishing their cultural identity? So that's the evaluation question. The data sources are interviews with youth, their families, and program staff, and a cultural identity survey of youth. So we do have a sample cultural identity survey that you will get in your resource binder. And then the timing is at program entry, 6 months into the program completion, and 6-month follow-up. So you try to establish your evaluation action plan and develop it according to your focus areas and your evaluation questions. Okay, next slide, please. And then the sample data collection plan. What data are you going to collect? So the number of youth who received the tribal name, where is the data and how do we collect it? We compile it from the program files, so we need a system or a process to do that. And who's responsible for collecting this data? In this example, it's the project coordinator. What is the target date? By the 10th of each month, then this information will be collected. And how will it be stored? So there'll be a spreadsheet in a project folder, for example. So all of these examples of what data to collect, where is it, how will we collect it, who's going to collect it, the target dates, and where it will be stored. So this is a sample data collection plan. Okay, next slide, please. And I will turn it over to Marnie.
Great, thank you, Etheline. Okay, so this is just a little example of how you could structure a data collection tool in Excel. Excel is often a really easy way to kind of collect and aggregate your data and make sure you have it all in one place so that you're not scrambling at the last minute to go through all your files and write everything down and add it all up. So we just gave a few examples here of some data elements that you could consider, or that the people in this program that we made up would consider. So of course, just some program intake information, the name of the youth, their gender, their date of birth, their tribes, their tribal enrollments, the date that they're entering the program, who referred them, especially if there are multiple referral sources. That could be something very interesting to look at. Then looking, one of the things that we're looking at for these youth are their education. So looking at their grade level and GPA, a number of absences at program entry. And that will give you the baseline information that you need to be able to look at their progress later on. And then looking at some of the cultural aspects that the program is focusing on. So does this youth have a tribal name or a spiritual name when they enter the program? Have they had a coming of age ceremony or a healing ceremony? Things like that. And then you can again look at those differences as you go on. And if you look at this, if you can see the tabs at the bottom, it's a little hard to see, but there's also a tab for performance measures where you can kind of put together all of the things that you need to report. And also there could be individual tabs for each participant where you gather more detailed information. And this tool is linked in the resource guide so that you can actually download this Excel file and look at it more closely and then modify it for anything that you might want to use it for. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so as Etheline mentioned a couple minutes ago, we have a sample cultural identity survey. Again, totally made up just based on the sample program, but it kind of shows you a format that you can use for a survey. So this is something called a Likert scale, which just means that you are looking at a grade of answers. So whether they strongly agree, disagree, or strongly disagree with the statement that you're making here. And of course, you can change these headings and change these questions to whatever is relevant for your program. But it's if you keep it to, I'd say, maybe 10 questions or under, it can be a very good way to gather some information quickly about how youth are experiencing the program. And then below that, we also offer some questions where they can write in their own answers. And again, these can be whatever questions are relevant to your program, but it's another way to gather some input. Okay, next slide, please. All right, so once you have all of this data and information, what are you going to do with it? How do you read your own story? How do you tell your own story? So one easy way to do this is, again, through Excel. This was all done with in that spreadsheet with a little bit of just dummy data. We took a very optimistic view that you're going to have, this program had 30 enthusiastic youth who all participated in their program activities. And so we put together a couple of slides to be able to look at their story. So we can see on the left, it looks at youth cultural experiences at program entry versus when they completed the program. So you see on these little charts, we had 2 youth who had a spiritual name or a tribal name before they entered the program. And at the end of the program, all 30 did. So that's a really huge difference. Only 1 youth had had a coming of age ceremony before entering the program, and then all 30 had done it by the end of the program, and so on for the others as well. And then we could look at the results from our survey. So we asked which of these activities caused the youth to feel a sense of increased cultural identity. So you can see all 30 of the youth said that receiving a name, a cultural name, really increased their cultural identity. And almost all of them also felt the same way about the coming of age ceremony and the healing ceremony, and a little bit less on the gender role education, but still a very positive result. So with this, you can show this to anybody who needs to know and be able to demonstrate that these youth probably would not have had these experiences if they hadn't been in this program, or at least they certainly had it up until this point in their lives, and that these experiences and activities increase their sense of cultural identity. And then you can look further at their outcomes for well-being and their education and things like that, and see if there are any differences that you're seeing there. Okay, next slide. Okay, so sharing our story. So again, once you have this data, once you have your graphs, once you have the story that you want to tell, how are you going to share it? And hopefully continue a longer conversation and dialogue within your community about youth and what they need and what they're accomplishing. So some suggestions that folks have done in the past are reports or infographics. Again, a lot of folks are, like me, visual learners and like being able to see things. You can give presentations to your council, to your court, to your schools, within the community at community events. You can give out handouts that summarize your program and what you were able to do. And you can also look at community newsletters, or if your tribe has a newspaper, they might want to do an article if you reach out to them. And of course, sharing learnings. Who needs to hear the story? Who wants to learn from what you did? OJJDP, of course, they want to learn from what you're accomplishing. Other grantees, I'm sure everybody here would love to know what everybody else is accomplishing and what you're learning. Your community, your spiritual leaders and elders, your community advisory council that hopefully was with you the whole way, but may want to hear more about it later on. Tribal court, tribal council, again, the schools, the families of the youth, and the community events are another place to share. And focusing back on the families and youth especially, one of my strong beliefs in terms of data collection and evaluation is that if someone gives you data, always give it back to them. Always let them know what you did with it, what you learned from it, and share that learning back with them so that they can learn too, and also so that they feel like what they gave you was of value and that it went for a good reason. Because data collection, it's not easy, and having to take surveys or having to do interviews, it takes some effort, and And sometimes when we're talking about things, especially about, you know, if we're talking about your spiritual identity or your cultural identity, that's a very, you know, that's a gift. That's a gift to be to share that with somebody who's asking you about it. And it's good to show appreciation for that. And of course, another way to share your story is to you'll put that into your sustainability planning. So, you know, who do we share this with specifically so that we can keep going? Again, that could be your tribal council, that could be other funders. And just in general, getting it out there really helps you'll get those resources to be able to continue the good work that you're doing. And of course, one audience may be future program staff. Again, we talked about turnover proofing your program. Of course, there's no way to completely turnover proof anything, but being able to share the story and be able to tell it in a way that they understand the importance of what they're doing and what's been done before, could, I think really help that transition. Okay, next slide.
Thank you so much, Marnie. So we walked you through an example program of increasing cultural identity, strengthening cultural pride. And if you were to think about using this model, you know, that the preparation is very important. The logic model is important, identifying performance measures, the data collection and analysis, and the sustainability that can result from the evaluation process. Next slide, please. So what are the suggested next steps? One thing I'd really like to encourage all of you is to not be anxious or afraid of evaluation. It's really an invigorating process. Maybe I'm the only one that thinks that way, but I think it's really interesting to look at, you know, evaluation, what we're doing. I was involved in a program years ago. It was a SAMHSA project, and we looked at family functioning using our cultural lifeways and ceremonies, and we were actually able to show that family functioning increased in a positive way. So I think it was because we had some very good partners in terms of the people that were doing the evaluation. They were very culturally sensitive, and they really encouraged us to create this culture of evaluation. So that's one of our suggested next steps. We also suggest convening an evaluation working group and include the stakeholders, include the relatives that are going to be participants in the program. Review your goals and objectives and develop a logic model from that. Develop an evaluation action plan, and again, connect with the technical assistance providers to support you. Next slide, please. So I'll turn it over to Marty in just a second for her final thoughts. But if you have any questions, then you're welcome to pose them in the chat, or you can unmute and ask them out loud if you prefer. But we wanted to bring this resource to you so that you can have some support and some guidance for engaging in evaluation. So I really thank you for being here, for participating, and I'd like to turn it over to Marnie.
Oh, thanks, Ethelene. Yes, I just want to echo what Ethelene said. Thank you very much for being here and for listening to us talk about evaluation for an hour and a half. I hope that you found it interesting. And we will be providing some downloadable resources for you, a lot of which we mentioned in this particular webinar, but also some additional things that may be useful to you, or if you're curious about learning more. And I hope that all of you will be inspired to tell your story as you go. And again, encourage you to ask any questions or give us any comments that you might have. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Marnie. I'd like to thank you for your assistance in developing and presenting this information, and also to Toja Laura for all of her technical support. And I would like to, Elika said, thank you. This is very good guidance, information, great samples. And just for our purposes of evaluation, we'd really like you to respond to an evaluation feedback survey on this. So if you look in the chat, then Toja Laura put a link in there to do that. So with that, we will go into a closing. If there's no questions or comments. So I'd just like all of you to, I'd like to invite you to sit back and relax and close your eyes and just think about, picture a very beautiful place where you feel calm and peaceful, like maybe it's on a hill, maybe in the mountains, maybe by a creek, by a river, maybe at home with your family, maybe in a ceremony. Just picture that and just imagine that you are you feel so calm, you feel so peaceful. You take a deep breath, you relax, put your feet flat on the floor. In these stressful times, then we really need to take time out to relax and debrief and to de-stress. And I invite you to do that now while you hear this closing prayer. Tunkashila le pampetu wopila kanka ugeni chapina. Tunkashila mitakuya pilena ushiwi chakila piena oi chakapiena woan guake wichozoni. Chumichake Tukashila na Tiwahe Tioshpai Oyate Iota Tukashila Wakanja ki Iwashta Pikte Mushi Unkila Pie Mitakuye Oyasi. Grandfather, creator, grandmother of the spirit world, I ask that you bless each one of us, that you bless the relatives that are in this virtual room. I ask that you watch over them, give them protection, good health and wellness, their families, their extended families. I ask that you bless the children and the people, all of our relatives, all of my relatives. Thank you very much, everybody. Have a very good day.